Released in 2017, the NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1080 Ti is widely regarded as one of the greatest graphics cards ever made. This 8-year-old Pascal GPU was among the top-tier options of its time, only surpassed by the GTX Titan X Pascal and the Titan XP. With an MSRP of $700, it was relatively affordable compared to modern high-end NVIDIA cards of today. Adjusted for inflation, that price would be just over $900 in 2025. For that cost in 2017, you were getting an enthusiast-level GPU capable of running nearly any game at 4K on high or ultra settings. The reason many consider the 1080 Ti to be one of the greatest GPUs of all time is how well its specs have held up over the years. Unlike NVIDIA's usual practice of limiting VRAM, memory bandwidth, and other features to encourage upgrades, the 1080 Ti was surprisingly feature-proof. As a result, it remained a viable option for modern, demanding games long after its release. Unfortunately, after 8 years, the GTX 1080 Ti is starting to show its age. Without modern features like hardware acceleration, ray tracing, and DLSS, the card can struggle in many of today's most demanding titles, especially at higher resolutions. However, when you look beyond these newer technologies, the raw specs of the 1080 Ti remain impressive for its age. With 3,584 shading units, 224 texture mapping units, and 88 render output units, NVIDIA didn't hold back when designing this GPU. Additionally, its 11GB of GDDR5X video memory running on a massive 352-bit bus still outclasses many of today's mid-range cards. In terms of clock speeds, the 1080 Ti has a base frequency of 1,481 MHz, boosting up to 1,582 MHz, with a memory clock running at 1,376 MHz. The GTX 1080 Ti is also known for running fairly hot, especially in blower style variants like the Founders Edition card. With the 250-watt TDP, it was generally recommended to pair with a power supply capable of delivering at least 600 watts. Today I'll be testing the GTX 1080 Ti in several popular games, including some released in the past few years, to see how this legendary graphics card holds up in 2025. For these tests, I'll be using my...
Aj táto, čo mám teraz, bere menej ako 1080. Tým, že má niečo vyšší výkon.
Newly upgraded GPU test bench featuring an Intel Core i7-12700KF, 32GB of DDR5 RAM clocked at 6,000 MHz, and all games running off a Gen 4 NVMe drive with Windows 11 installed. The main goal of these benchmarks is to push the 1080 Ti while maintaining playable frame rates with good visual quality. In most cases, I was able to run games at their native resolution using preset settings to keep things simple. I also tested a few titles in 1440p when I felt the card was capable of handling it. Since I'm working with a budget, I don't own every new release that I'd like to test. Additionally, some of the latest titles may not run properly or at all on this aging Pascal GPU. If you own a 1080 Ti or are considering getting one for a specific game I didn't test, be sure to do some research before making a purchase. To start, I wanted to test just one.
Bude teraz Pascal sérii, bude končiť podpora ovládačov. Pascal. To je Pascal sérii. 1080 Titan, 1080, 1080, 1070, 1060, 1050. Všetky tieto budú nebudú mať už tú podporu ovládačov. Aj 1660 nebude mať tiež podporu.
Esports title, since the GTX 1080 Ti is more than capable of handling most of these games at both 1080p and 1440p. In Counter-Strike 2, I set the graphics to the very high preset at 1080p and saw an average of around 220 FPS during a practice match on Dust 2. After bumping the resolution up to 1440p with the same settings, the average frame rate dipped by only 40 FPS, landing at around 180 FPS, still delivering a highly competitive experience for most players. Next, I tested the 2021 PC release Forza Horizon 5 using the built-in benchmark tool at the Ultra preset. At 1080p, the GTX 1080 Ti delivered a solid 79 FPS on average. When bumping the resolution up to 1440p with the same settings, the average frame rate dropped by only 10 FPS, coming in at 69 FPS. For Red Dead Redemption 2, I tested it at 1080p with the quality slider maxed out, which resulted in a mix of high and ultra settings. The frame rates ranged from around 50 to 80 FPS, averaging about 65 FPS while riding through various environments. In Cyberpunk 2077, I started at native 1080p using the high preset. After about 10 minutes of driving through various areas of Night City, the average frame rate stabilized at 90 FPS. When increasing the resolution to 1440p, the average dropped to 50 FPS, which is still perfectly acceptable performance in this game, in my opinion. For Hogwarts Legacy, I tested the game at 1080p with the Ultra preset and TAA set to high. After exploring various in-game environments, the frame rate averaged around 75 FPS. When increasing the resolution to 1440p, I lowered the preset to high, which resulted in a solid 66 FPS average, which is a worthwhile frame rate to resolution trade-off. For Baldur's Gate 3, I tested at 1080p using the Ultra preset, focusing exclusively on the more demanding city areas. The game delivered a consistent 85 FPS on average, both in and out of combat. At 1440p Ultra, the average frame rate only dropped to 62 FPS, which would be my preferred way to play through BG3. In Starfield, I stuck to 1080p since the GTX 1080 Ti struggled enough with it. At native 1080p with medium settings, I averaged around 40 FPS in the demanding New Atlantis area. While this performance is still playable for many, using resolution scaling could help improve frame rates and stabilize overall performance. For Ghost of Tsushima, I tested the game at 1080p using the high preset. The visuals still hold up well at this resolution, and with an average frame rate of 59 FPS, some further setting optimization should allow players to achieve the desired performance while staying at 1080p. Next, I tested Horizon Forbidden West at native 1080p with the high preset. This resulted in an average of 65 FPS across the environments I explored. Once again, the visuals remain intact, and the performance should be more than enough to satisfy most players in a single-player experience like this. Black Myth Wukong was another title where the GTX 1080 Ti struggled a bit more than in other tests. Using the built-in benchmark at 1080p native with the medium preset, the card averaged 52 FPS, so like Starfield, upscaling should be utilized to push for higher frame rates. Moving on to some recent releases, I tested Spider-Man 2 at 1080p with the high preset. During the opening sequence, the 1080 Ti maintained a steady 60 FPS average. It's unclear how much further optimization these Pascal cards will receive for this title, but there's still a chance that future driver updates or game patches could help improve performance. Lastly, I tested Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 at 1080p using the high preset. Since this game is already pretty well optimized, I had no issues maintaining an average of around 83 FPS in this opening section. Based on the games I tested, the GTX 1080 Ti holds up as a solid 10.
Vyšla dvojka a podal som tie testy tohto, tak to celkom nezvládalo. KT2. Ako to mohli testovať ľudia na Ultra, aj tak.
1080p gaming card that remains capable of handling many titles at 1440p. While it does have some feature limitations and will likely lose updated driver support in the somewhat near future, its large VRAM buffer and strong raw performance make it a viable option for current owners to keep using for a few more years, so long as it continues to run the games and programs they need. That being said, unless you find one for a really good price, the GTX 1080 Ti isn't necessarily a great value GPU on the used market in 2025. From what I've seen in the US, these cards typically go for around $180 to $200. At a similar price point, you can pick up an RX 6600 or Intel Arc A580, both which can handle all 1080p gaming with ease and will receive driver support for years to come. For those on an even tighter budget, lower tier Pascal cards like the GTX 1080, 1070 Ti, and 1070 can often be found for closer to or below $100. While they share the same age-related limitations as the 1080 Ti, they may offer better value for budget builders looking to maximize performance per dollar in 2025. While it's not a great buy today, the GTX 1080 Ti's performance after 8 years proves its legendary status. Considering its $700 MSRP and the value that it offered back in 2017, it remains one of the best high-end GPUs ever released, and Nvidia will most likely never match that level of value again.
Toto
If you enjoyed this
grafika a ešte
breakdown, don't
aj
forget to like the video and subscribe for more
to
PC
dokáže
hardware content.
reprezentovať
Also, let me know
aj
in the comments if you're still rocking a 1080
budúcnosti.
Ti or any older GPU, how's
Aj
it holding up,
budúcnosti.
and how much longer do you think you'll keep using it? As always, thanks for watching.
Zaujímavé, že aké bude reálne limit pre túto grafiku.